Okay, welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. My name is Leming Wang. I'm co-hosting the seminar with Dr. Chris Mercier. Today, follow a tradition, we are doing the MURP workshop Extravaganza. So we are inviting two teams from our MURP Master of Urban and Regional Planning program to present their MURP workshop project that's related to this seminar, transportation related project. Our first team will present their project on OHSU Night Access project. The presentation will be presenter will be Shane Valley and Leah Anderson.
Good afternoon. As Professor Wang said, I'm Shane Valley. This is Leah Anderson, and together we're representing a team of 6 urban and regional planning graduate students. We worked with the Oregon Health and Science University over the last 6 months to develop a strategy to help their employees get to and from their central campuses at night and early in the morning. And we're calling this the Night Access Plan. I just wanted to thank Professor Wang and Professor Mercier for this opportunity to present our work at the Friday Transportation Seminar. This is an awesome forum, and I hope you guys are at least somewhat engaged by these night transportation issues as we've become through this process. So just going to talk about what we're going to discuss today. First, just a little bit of background about OHSU, where it is, what it is, its relevance in the region. And this will inform the rest of the presentation, which is broken into 2 pieces. 2 questions that we started with when we decided to embark on this planning process. The first is, what challenges do employees currently face when they're traveling to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning? And then what can OHSU do to make it easier for those employees to get to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning? Oops. So where is OHSU? It's about 3/4 of a mile south of us right now, just south of downtown Portland. And like downtown Portland, OHSU is basically right in the heart of the region, which is also the focal point of the local and the regional transportation network. And relatively speaking, in the region and in the city, OHSU and downtown Portland have excellent transportation access. There are many options. So in terms of places you want to be located in the region, this is one of the best places to be located. When we're talking about OHSU, we're talking about the 2 central campuses. OHSU has several campuses throughout the region and throughout the state, but we're speaking of the 2 central campuses, one on Markham Hill and one on South Waterfront. The Markham Hill campus is on top of Markham Hill, which is the hill just south of downtown Portland. Downtown Portland itself is anywhere from 30 to 150 feet above sea level, whereas Markham Hill tops out around 500 feet above sea level. And this transition between these 2 vertical elevations takes place in about 1/4 of a mile, which makes for some really steep climbing if you're trying to get there by bike or by foot. The Markham Hill campus is where basically the primary OHSU campus is, where most of the activities are going on. The second of the 2 central campuses is in the South Waterfront neighborhood, which is a relatively newer mixed-use neighborhood. And it's a smaller but growing outpost of OHSU. The South Waterfront campus is much more accessible than the Markham Hill campus. It sits on the western landing of the new Tillicum Crossing, the transit pedestrian bike-only bridge. It has some of the best bikeways in the city, access to MAX transit line, a couple of streetcar lines, dozens of bus lines. And altogether, when contrasted with Markham Hill, which has one basically arterial north-south connection to downtown Portland, it's much easier to reach. It's been about 10 years now. In 2007, or 2007, OHSU worked with the city of Portland to improve the link between Markham Hill and South Waterfront. And South Waterfront at the time was just kind of a burgeoning neighborhood, and OHSU was looking into expanding there. And the product of that partnership was the Portland Aerial Tram, which is a link between those 2 campuses. It's a 4-minute ride. And basically what that did is moved the front door for OHSU from Markham Hill down to the South Waterfront, which is just a much more accessible place. to reach many more options. It's easy to ride your bike there, walk, take transit, or even drive. You stash your vehicle there. You take the tram up to Markham Hill, and it puts you right into the heart of the Markham Hill campus, right into OHSU Hospital. It's proved extremely popular for employees. Over 8,000 use it a day, 85% of which are employees. And this will factor into some of the obstacles faced by employees when they travel to and from OHSU at night. So OHSU is the largest employer in the city and in the state. They employ, every year they see about 16,000, or sorry, not 16,000, 250,000 patients per year. They employ 16,000 healthcare workers, educational faculty, and researchers. At any given time, they're teaching 5,000 students, and they employ 2,000 contract workers. What this population looks like at night, between roughly 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., there are anywhere between 500 and 1,500 shifts being worked at OHSU, mostly on Markham Hill. And there, of those 500 and 1,500 shifts, there are about 4,000 employees in a given month who work those shifts. So that's about 20% of the OHSU population that interacts with these nighttime transportation issues. So it's not a small number of people we're talking about. And last, OHSU's relevance really can't be overstated to the region just because of its size, it being the largest employer in the city, and its success in bringing in research money and the highly paid employees that follow that money. It's estimated that OHSU pumps in $229 million into local Portland businesses, and that's a figure from 2000, and that's grown immensely since as the region's grown and OHSU has grown. And Eco Northwest, the local economic consulting firm, estimated that if for some reason OHSU were to disappear from the region, the Portland region would lose $3.3 billion in economic output. And so getting to what our team worked on, answering the question, what challenges do employees face in getting to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning? To understand these challenges, we asked ourselves 7 questions towards the beginning of our process. And we answered these 7 questions by surveying over 1,500 night employees, by performing an inventory of available transportation options, and performing an inventory and analysis of the surrounding transportation infrastructure, along with some other data sources. So the 7 questions we asked were, why are employees traveling to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning? Who's traveling, demographically who's traveling? Where are employees coming from? When are employees traveling to and from OHSU? How are employees traveling there? How can they travel there? And then kind of a synthesis of those first 6 questions, taking the most important bits of each of those 6. What obstacles do those employees face trying to get to and from OHSU at night? All 7 questions are really interesting, and answers to those are in our plan, and I'd love to show you where that lives so you can look at it. But we're going to look at just that 7th question, what are the primary obstacles employees face? And so in analyzing all of that data that we talked about earlier, we found that there were 3 kind of broad challenges that employees faced in trying to get to campus at night. The first was the spatial and temporal availability of the transportation options. The second was the affordability of those transportation options. And the third was actual and perceived sense of safety concerns, getting not just to the campus, but getting around the campus at night. So looking first at the availability of options, looking at temporal availability, the issues with respect to temporal availability became really evident when we overlaid shifts starting and ending times, employee shifts starting and ending times, these are nighttime employees, with the available transportation options. And so the wavy lines are basically when employees are coming to and from OHSU for their shifts to start and end. And the horizontal bars are transportation options and their availability. On the x-axis, you have time of day. So it starts from 0 and goes to 24 hours. What's most evident, even if you don't look in real detail at this chart, is the lack of options before 5 a.m. Before 5 a.m., there are no alternatives to driving, walking, or biking. Walking and biking become much less likely to occur after 9:30 p.m., which is when the aerial tram shuts down, that easy-to-reach front door of OHSU that has some of the best bikeways in the city. After that shuts down, it's no longer you ride to the South Waterfront and you take the tram up. You have to ride up Markham Hill yourself, which is that 300 to 400 foot elevation difference that you have to cover on foot or by bike. And so those trips just become much less likely to occur. And then even at night, though there are transit options that extend past midnight in some cases, those options are much less frequent than than at other times of day. And TriMet's network, the way their network is designed, is very heavily transfer-based, which is great when the frequencies are high, but when it's not high, frequencies aren't high, the network sort of breaks down and becomes a lot more difficult for people to use, especially people who need reliability for their jobs. So looking at the transit lines that have trips between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., we can see that it does reach, these are only the transit lines that have a direct connection to OHSU. Because of that lower frequency, we weren't considering a lot of the transfer options, which is in line with how surveyed employees were actually using the transit lines. So these are the direct transit lines. And a lot of employees are within reach. All those dots are where night employees from OHSU work. But there are still quite a few employees that don't have access to that. Another option that employees do use, is popular with employees, is Car2Go. The home area for Car2Go is even smaller than the geographic area covered by these options. And there are also only 3 spots for Car2Go cars up on Markham Hill. So looking at the affordability of these options, this chart shows on the left-hand side the household income of nighttime employees. On the right-hand side, the primary way they get to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning. The purple shaded flows represent the employees that have a household income that is below the regional median income. The regional median income is $58,000 a year. The big takeaway from this is that these lower income employees are overrepresented in transit use, in walking, and in carpooling. This makes sense because these are the cheaper options, but as we just talked about, those are the options that are also have the least temporal span and geographic span. And so these populations are really end up paying for their transportation options, are getting to and from OHSU not with money, but with their time. And when we think about where, so if you remember where those transit lines were, if we again think about where, these are just the lower income employees, where they live, there are a lot of these folks that don't have access to transit, to those options, even that are less reliable, and so they're driving. And we all know that driving is immensely expensive. Just owning, operating, and purchasing a vehicle is extremely expensive. And on top of that, they have to pay for parking. At OHSU, paid parking happens between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. And it's not uncommon for nighttime shifts to start during this paid parking time and go into unpaid parking time. So a common nighttime shift starts at 11 a.m. and they get off at 11 p.m. At 11 p.m., because there aren't quality options for these people, they have to drive into work, and they have to pay for daily parking, which can cost $13 a day for a daily parking pass, or they can get an annual parking permit, for which there is a 7 to 10 year wait list. That parking permit is cheaper, but for these lower income employees, that just parking alone can cost upwards of 10% of their household income, which is a huge cost imposition. That third area challenge that people were facing getting to and from OHSU was safety. In our analysis, we took a look at Vision Zero, the City of Portland Vision Zero crash data, speed data collected along the nearby arterials. And so after 9:30, when the aerial tram shuts down in the South Waterfront, and the front door from OHSU, for OHSU Central campuses, moves from that South Waterfront location up to Markham Hill. And the front door moves, so this is the Markham Hill campus up here. The front door moves here. This is the front door, where we've got, in the last 10 years, we have 8 recorded cyclist injuries and 1 recorded serious injury. So that's the intersection at the front of the image on the right is the intersection. But that's basically the front door of the Markham Hill campus. Additionally, along Terwilliger Boulevard, which is the boulevard that links downtown Portland to the north with Markham Hill in the south, traffic counts and speed data show that the 85th percentile speed is 12 miles an hour over the posted speed, and over 90% of motorists are traveling above the speed limit. And then keep in mind that these are counts that were taken during the day, and so at night you can imagine with even less impedance for motorists, they're traveling even faster. Along Terwilliger Boulevard is also where this sense of actual and perceived safety intersected. We received tons of comments that were concerned with, or people that were concerned with the quality of lighting along Terwilliger, which is one of the primary ways people can walk between downtown and OHSU. But it wasn't just lighting along Terwilliger. It was lighting around campus. It was lighting for people who were just walking out to their cars in parking lots. It was lighting for people just walking up one of the various trails to OHSU. That's a pretty creepy trail. That's kind of straight out of a horror film. That's one of the ways to get to OHSU, if you're brave. And then also just waiting around for transit. The stop looks well lit, but it's difficult to see what's around the stop. It's not a highly trafficked place, so people just feel uncomfortable waiting for transit there. So these issues of traffic safety and poor lighting and people and just nighttime not being a time where there's a lot of other people around to see you, compounded with a public safety officer presence that's just not felt by the population at night, really contributed to this issue, this sense issue of safety and actual and perceived safety. And so in answering that question, what challenges do employees face in coming to and from OHSU at night and early in the morning, we found that employees face, one, an issue with the availability or convenience of using options, two, the affordability of these options, and three, safety, actual and perceived safety. And now Leah is going to talk about some of our strategies for addressing these issues.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leah. So yeah, as Shane just described, we kind of came up with these three large challenge areas. Can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay, cool. During our research and analysis, and those were mainly in convenience, affordability, and safety. So moving forward, and as we started to look at, how could we possibly make this easier for people, what can we recommend to OHSU, we started coming up with all these recommendations, and these recommendations could basically fit into 8 broader action areas. So we were coming up with things that ranged from, like, let's improve the bike facilities in Garage E to let's build a second tram from here to here. So some of them are more feasible, some of them are going to take less time, be less costly, but we were coming up with a wide range of things, but we found that they could all fit into kind of these larger buckets, and we wanted to organize them in that way for OHSU. So you'll see it's also on the back of your handout, because I know the writing here might be a little bit small. But the 8 action areas we came up with are to improve conditions for people walking and biking to OHSU at night, to improve the campus night environment. So those two, although they hit on all of our strategies of wanting to improve safety, convenience, and affordability, they most closely relate to safety. So then the following 3 really address the convenience issue. So one of those being the issue that Shane talked about with the tram closing or transit options not being available, and kind of filling that gap, but also in educating the OHSU community about the issues that employees are facing at night when they're trying to get to work, and then tying this into what else is going on in the region. So the Southwest Corridor project that you're all probably pretty familiar with. And then the final 3 have to do more with affordability. So the first one, just trying to think about those housing and transportation costs and how they factor into people's lives, and giving people an option to live either closer to OHSU or closer to those transit lines that directly come to OHSU. Prioritizing parking for those night and early morning communities, so getting at those people that come in at 11 a.m. and they don't have a parking pass and they can't get a swing shift pass. And then incentivizing non-drive alone commuting. So in this process, we came up with a grand total of 49 recommendations. And we kind of came to this realization as a group that it was like, do we want to go and say, here are 49 recommendations, have at it? Or do we want to say, here are 5 recommendations that you should do and are really important and will make a very high impact? And we kind of decided we wanted to do both. So we are giving OHSU a library of recommendations. We're giving them all 49 recommendations with an insane amount of data and information to back it up. So we have these 4 scoring metrics that are related to each recommendation, and then also like next steps and partners that they would work with, so that they can take these recommendations and decide how they want to move forward. And all of these are in line with kind of how OHSU sees the recommendations. So we talked to them and we're like, what's cost for you? What's considered a low cost? And this would be their cost burden. And then for impact, we were looking at specifically for night employees, so this is not how it would impact like the region or all of OHSU employees. This is night-specific employees, and equity impact is of those night employees, those that are low income or traditionally underserved. So this is just a quick showing of one of our recommendation pages. I'm not going to go into depth on it, but just this is what, one of the recommendations to extend hours of a tram tower elevator would look like in our plan. So like I said, we wanted to give them all 49 recommendations, but we also wanted to say, we've done a lot of research, we've looked at all these things, and these are some ways to package them or things to view as being really important. So OHSU is an institution. They have a pretty large transportation and parking department, and just kind of a lot of power to execute things, especially on campus, in a pretty timely manner. So we wanted to give them a list of recommendations that they could do on their own without having to work with like TriMet or PBOT or Portland Streetcar. So there's a grouping of recommendations for that specifically, and then express bargains are things that came up that seem pretty quick and pretty easy, but will actually have a pretty big impact. Like a lot of people wanted a transit screen in the main hospital. So there's one on the south waterfront, but there's not one up on the main campus, just so people can see when different options are coming and going. And then the third one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about are the high impact recommendations. So those are ones that they may need to partner with other people, they may be costly, they may be time consuming, but they're going to have a really long lasting high impact. So yeah, I'm just going to go into a couple of those and then we'll get to some questions. So these are our 5 high impact recommendations. One that's in the prioritized parking action area, 2 that are in the fill the gap with the tram and transit action area, 1 that's in the education action area, and 1 in the walking and biking action area. So, and this is not the full amount of information that's available in our plan. This is just a couple things that I wanted to highlight during the presentation today. So for prioritizing parking, we're recommending that they have a parking permit that specifically targets those night employees, and this would be based off of transit availability. So the reason that this would be high impact is it would be, there is no transit options when you start and end your shift. Therefore, we recognize that you're probably going to be more likely to need to drive if you have access to a car, and we will prioritize your parking permit and kind of let you jump the 10-year wait list, which is what they do now for the swing shift employees. And so this might be high impact also because it will change as the transit options change, right? So if all of a sudden bus line 8 starts operating on slightly different hours, that might impact who has access to this. And then also, as much as we would like to believe that alternative options such as taking transit and walking and biking are the primary mode for most people, that's still not the case. So looking at the chart here, you can see on the left-hand side, the purple 57%, those are people that drive as their primary mode of night employees, and then 79% are the percentage that at least sometimes drive. So it also will impact a lot of people. The second one that I'm going to talk about really briefly here is just educating the OHSU shift managers about night transportation barriers. And this is something that OHSU has actually already been really receptive to and is really interested in, and just that based on the graph that Shane talked about earlier, the people that are starting their shifts really early in the morning don't have any other options, and if the people making the schedules can bump their shifts back a half an hour and it really helps people get to work on time and be less stressed, that's huge. And so that's important. And then also we were thinking about this in the context of carpooling, and if you can get more shifts to start and end around the same time and have some type of an internal carpooling app, then people can also, that'll be more feasible for the number of people coming in and out. And this is also something that OHSU is already looking at doing. So it's pretty cool. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is subsidizing night employee rideshare options. And this is something that OHSU is actually now currently doing, or was doing over the last couple of weeks during the the TriMet transit service changes. And this one really has 3 different options, which is one of the reasons it's so impactful, and that's that it can fill the gap between the 2 central campuses, so making it easier for people to get between the 2 campuses when the tram is not running. And then also between central campuses and park and rides, which is what they were doing during the TriMet service changes, and then also between the central campuses and employees' homes. So kind of how they're thinking about using this now is when the tram is not running, because it's not possible for the tram to run 24 hours, 7 days a week, is using this as an option for people to get between campuses and then see how many people are traveling, when they're traveling, and then eventually maybe have a shuttle service, but they kind of want to see where and when the demand is before they do that. So we just kind of wanted to leave you with a little bit of a tidbit about the importance of night transportation. And I'm sure, as all of you know, as students, you know, we don't really operate in a dawn to dusk society anymore. Things are happening at night. People are traveling after dark and early in the morning. And a lot of transportation systems in the U.S. and around the globe are starting to adapt their hours and service for the weekends. So when people are out at bars or things like that, wanting to get people home safe. But there's a large percentage and large number of people that are traveling at night for other things like getting to work. And we really need to start looking at that. So with that, I think we have 5 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Two questions. I don't know if we'll have time for both of them. So there's, with the tram moving the front door of OHSU from Markham Hill to the South Waterfront, do you know if OHSU has an action plan for maintenance and adverse weather? Like whether they have like shuttles that are like good to go, or how they deal with that, and whether that's a system that they've considered extending for off hours of tram operation?
Yeah, so do you want to take it? Sure. Yeah.
So OHSU does have backup plans when the tram like breaks down, and it usually doesn't break down for long, but they have some shuttles on standby, and then they have agreements with TriMet, for example, to co-opt some buses and say, hey, we need this. And TriMet's more than happy to help them with that. They have a capital and maintenance budget basically for the tram, and so it has funds all the way through its 50-year design life. As for extending those treatments, that's they're much more gung-ho about trying to do something like that, basically having some kind of shuttle service for replacing the tram rather than extending it hours, just because that would blow the capital and maintenance budget that they currently have. They would have to replace the tram much earlier than they're planning on doing so.
I would just add one thing that we kind of got to learn about and experience through this project is that they actually will run the tram when the weather is really bad. So recognizing that Markham Hill and getting up southwest to Terwilliger, that's a really steep slope. So like this January when there were those ice storms and winter storms, the people that lived on Markham Hill in that neighborhood could actually take the tram to get from the South Waterfront home. So like when buses and cars, you know, if it wasn't necessarily safe for them. So OHSU does operate that tram when the weather is extremely bad to help people get safely to where they need to go. Yeah.
Nice job. Seems like you have a great product for your clients. I'm curious about some of the parking options, and you did, it sounds like, come up with some recommendations, but when I heard about the 10-year wait list and the pricing of parking and stuff, I thought, especially thinking Don Shoup type stuff, that there's a lot of potential if you really could completely overhaul the parking and really incorporate some variable time of day pricing, and instead of giving a permit for like a whole year, you have to pay every day and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, so I'm just curious how much you talked about that, or if you sensed some real institutional barriers. Like, for example, are a lot of the employees up there unionized? And if you really overhauled parking, would that become a negotiation contract issue, things like that?
Yeah, so kind of at the beginning of our process when we were jumping into this plan, we saw two kind of avenues we could go, and one was let's completely redo their parking management policies, and one was let's look at the bigger picture and take that into account but not let it take control of our project. And I think, so we did come up with several recommendations for how they could change parking. Like one that they are thinking about doing is having one garage designated just for swing shift employees, so day and night swing shift employees. So it would actually be the most utilized garage on campus with people just replacing each other. And they're relatively open to thinking about changing their parking policies, but they do have to keep kind of the people that have those parking passes in mind, and a lot of them are very high up and have a lot of power and really don't want to get rid of their parking passes. Yeah, but they're thinking about doing like a parking pass buyback system, and yeah, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
There are just a lot of political barriers to doing an overhaul, and we just, like Leah said, we didn't want it to take over our plan, and that's in the scope of their kind of central transportation plan that they're also working on.
Yeah, I think one more. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see whether we have time.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's thank the first team again. Our second presenters are Curtis Fisher and Ray Atkinson. They will talk about the value of place in Tigard, Oregon.
So my name is Curtis Fisher, and I'm here with my partner Ray Atkinson, and we're representing our group, which we called Delta Planning, to work on this project in this area of Tigard called the Tigard Triangle. Our main client was the city of Tigard, but we also work with another New York consulting firm called State of Place that specializes in walkability analytics and forecasting the return on investment from walkability improvements. So our project purpose was to maximize walkability in the triangle, help make some recommendations on first steps that they could take to implement their existing strategic plan, improve walkability, the overall quality of the built environment, and support new economic development. The project area that we're working in is this area called the Triangle, and you can see why they call it that. It's bound by these three major freeway or highways on three sides, I-5, 217, and 99W. There's limited access to and from the Triangle, and the uses inside the Triangle are mainly very auto-oriented, some big box retail, some office parks, and a little bit of residential. This graphic right here, I think, describes the situation in the Triangle really well. It is a major employment center. Over 7,000 employees are making their way into the area every day from 9 to 5. So unlike what you just heard, we are kind of dealing with a dawn to dusk community here. And a large share of those people are coming from very long distances, and many of them are not even living in the city of Tigard. So this was a challenge from a community engagement point of view. How do we engage these people? How do we connect with these people? What's their connection to the Triangle, and getting them interested, invested in implementing these plans and supporting some of these improvements. So as I said, a key partner in this was State of Place. We were charged to use their analytic tools to inform their recommendations. There's a certain experimental quality to this. They have developed this inventory based on 280 data points in 10 urban design categories. These are informed by research such as focus groups that they've conducted in different areas of the country, empirical research, literature review, and expert interviews to identify these features that are most connected with people's perception of walkability. And this produced a walkability index score and a profile of all the street segments in the area. And we used this to identify some areas for improvements that we wanted to focus on for our recommendations. Here's a summary of the different urban design categories that we were looking at. It's not just what happens in the public right-of-way, but also the adjacent land uses and the form of those uses and how they influence walkability. So we went through segment by segment, looking at things like building heights, continuity of the building facade, curb cuts, building density, We also looked at things like in these liveliness and upkeep categories, things like graffiti, litter, broken windows, and things like that. And then we inventoried destinations such as parks and public spaces, but also smaller scale retail establishments that we know drive walking trips, cafes, restaurants, small scale retail shops. And then also the more traditional engineering features like pedestrian amenities, sidewalks, crosswalks, landscaping features, street trees, and elements like that. And this was the product of that process. So this index score is based on a 100-point scale. So basically it confirms what we know, that the Tiger Triangle is not very walkable. The profile breaks it down into each one of those urban design categories. The personal safety was a high point. The destination categories were lacking. And this profile helped us identify specifically this area right here, north of 72nd, which is this major arterial that cuts through the triangle, and this general area right here where they are envisioning a future pedestrian-oriented district. Priorities were one thing that the city was very interested in, a major goal of this project. They gave the graphic on the right shows the goals that the city gave to them. The top ones were walkability, rents, retail rents, and those were associated with individual design elements that they recommended should be focused on to improve those, to advance those goals. And then they identified three top priorities based on those goals that were compared to the existing conditions in the triangle. And those were those top three categories that you see right there. This goes into a little bit more detail of how they determine those goals. This is interesting because the graph on the left shows you exactly the features that you would focus on if you solely wanted to increase the index score. So density was the most important factor in affecting that, but the city doesn't have as much direct control over density. It's a result of long-term development, public-private partnerships, and the interest in private development in the area. What they do have more control over are these pedestrian amenities, traffic safety, those engineering features that happen in the public right-of-way that are really under the city's direct control. And then we had output like this for every single street segment that gave us the index for a specific street segment and produced a state of place profile for each segment. So this was one of the lowest performing segments in the triangle. One of those areas where we identified to focus on improvements, and mainly because of these really low scores in those two high priority categories. And then they produced the output that you see on the right that indicates specific elements that should be improved to bring the performance of that segment up. Because this is an economic development project and part of the city's long-term goals is to utilize walkability improvements to improve economic development, we did a little property value analysis to identify specific properties that would benefit most from those improvements. We looked at value per acre. We looked at the tax lot data from Washington County to try and identify those areas that would benefit. We looked at value per acre and also investment to land index. The value per acre is important because that's a good indicator of, it's more indicative of, it's more useful for determining walkability because it measures not just the total value of the property, which would show that these larger properties over here would perform a lot better, but it captures the value of more compact development that we know improves walkability. And then we looked at the investment to land index. This is a somewhat commonly used metric to determine the potential for redevelopment of certain properties. The basic operating theory is that landowners don't want to sit on valuable property. So a lower investment to land index indicates that properties are underdeveloped compared to their economic potential, and the higher value properties down here in the south have already seen more investment and are being developed closer to their potential. And both these graphics kind of show, again, this area to the north here that could benefit from more economic investment and would be more likely to respond to some investments in the public right-of-way. Community engagement, this wasn't just solely about making data-driven decisions. We wanted to make sure that the recommendations that we came up with were aligned with the values of the people in the Tiger Triangle community. And as I described before, when we use that word community, we are talking about a lot of people that don't necessarily live there and aren't necessarily in residents of Tigard. So the biggest challenge here was to spend a lot of time in the project area, on the ground. We knocked on every single door of every single property in the Tiger Triangle. We intercepted people on the street. We tabled at businesses like Western Bike Works, and we had to be very proactive in being out there and engaging people while they were in the triangle, when they were there to get their input. And the product of that was we got 122 responses to our survey, which we thought was very good, considering that we have not very many residents in the triangle. We don't have any active business groups. We don't have any neighborhood associations there. We were successful in engaging employers and shoppers, but also residents. We did find out that there is a culture of walking in the triangle. Of survey respondents, about half said that they walk at least a few times a week in the triangle, which we thought was pretty impressive considering how few people actually live there. So we wanted to know who was walking in the triangle, how often they were walking in the triangle. We wanted to know why they were walking in the triangle, what was driving their trips. So we definitely found that there were very few people walking for school or work. A lot more people walking for recreation. We thought that we talked to a lot of people that were walking for recreation and exercise on their lunch breaks. We theorized that they would want more walkable amenities in the area to recreate during their breaks at work and during their lunch breaks. And they were making some trips for daily errands too. We wanted to know what kind of priority, where they wanted walkability improvements to go. So we asked them this question of if they had $100 to spend, how would they spend it? And the responses, we sort of tailored these so they would relate back to those stated place urban design categories and kind of put those categories into a language that was more familiar with to them. So we asked them how they felt about sidewalks, attracting more small businesses. That was a function of mainly density and the benefits of density in providing more small-scale retail development and restaurants and cafes and things like that. And then some more traditional safety improvements like improving pedestrian crossings and reducing auto speeds. And sidewalks were a high priority, but also the lack of destinations was a big concern for a lot of people. So we did find that they wanted more reasons to get out and take more walking trips when they were in the triangle. And then Ray's going to take us through a few more survey findings and go through some of our alternatives and recommendations.
Hello, I'm Ray. The survey also looked at two maps we provided to the community as we did the survey. This first map looked at hazards and destination issues for the triangle, and as you can see, most of the hazards are located along along 72nd here. There's a lot of red, so it basically means people don't feel safe walking along 72nd. As you can see the comments here, it's a narrow street with deep ditches, excessive auto speeds, no sidewalks, and several other places had no sidewalks as well. And then a few people commented about infill development in the big box stores. Basically, there's underutilized parking lots that people just weren't parking in much, so they wanted to put in like food carts and basically infill development. And also there's a desire for trails and parks because there's very limited trails and parks in the triangle. And there's also a desire to get across I-5 because it's a barrier for walking and biking, so they wanted a pedestrian bike bridge across I-5. Even with all these barriers, people are walking in a triangle. And as you can see on 72nd, in the same area that had all the red hazard markers, there is a big blue line, which is the largest amount of walking trips in the whole triangle. So people are walking even though there's no sidewalks. And the fewest walking trips was along getting across Dartmouth Street, which Dartmouth Street is here with the yellow line. So you're trying to get from here on the south side where the employment is to north side with the residential. There's a very limited amount of people walking across Dartmouth because there's just no crosswalks. So that was a barrier that we found through the survey. And then we used the survey results in our community workshop, which we found out through our community workshop that there's a concentration of mixed-use development in the north that people wanted along the 72nd area north of Dartmouth. And they also wanted to focus improvements, streetscape improvements along 72nd, like sidewalks and buffer strips along the area along 72nd, which we'll show in the future. And then also food carts was a surprise for us in the unused big box store parking lot. There was like 6 yellow dots in the parking lot, so that was a change from what we thought people would want, and we included that feedback. And then there is a strong desire to preserve existing natural areas throughout the triangle. And then we used the community input to bring in alternatives. Before we went to the workshop, we actually had 2 preliminary alternatives, and we created these preliminary alternatives from the community input and opportunities that were identified through the state place index and profile, and also the property value analysis, the value per acre, and the other property value analysis. And then all the community input was brought in to create the preferred alternative. And also we reviewed existing plans and city goals, and then State Place provided us with a prioritization report that helped us create a better preferred alternative. Before I show you the alternatives, I wanted to just show you how the process went into creating the 2 alternatives. We used a chalkboard where basically we had all this data, and a lot of groups had this problem where we had just so much data and we had to create something with it. So we had, we knew we wanted crosswalks, sidewalks, we wanted mixed-use development, we wanted parks, trails, we wanted all this stuff, but we wanted to provide 2 alternatives for people to choose from at the community workshop. So we put this into 2 different buckets, which we'll show in the next couple slides. So alternative 1 that we created was inactive corridors that focused along a linear park that connected the trail, proposed a trail on the north side, on the north side here, with the proposed trail on the south side here, and this is a linear park here. And this linear park also connects the residential here with the employment in the south. And then as a short-term attractor, we focused food carts throughout the triangle so we can get people destinations to go to. And then alternative 2 looked at neighborhood centers that focused along the light rail coming in the next 10, 20 years with the red station areas here. There's 2 stations proposed for the triangle in this estimated areas. And then we focused mixed-use development around those 2 transit areas, transit station areas. And then we also looked at food carts as a short-term attractor as well in preparation for the light rail. Our preferred alternative, we found through talking to the city that the linear park was not really what the city wanted, so we focused on pedestrian street instead. So we shifted over to 69th, which you can see pedestrian street here on 69th. And then in the short term, we're focusing on 72nd here with the street improvements and mixed-use development on 72nd at Atlanta Street. And then long term, we've looked at street improvements on 69th along the pedestrian street and mixed-use development and pocket parks. And now I'm going to focus in on one of our recommendations, the one at 72nd and Atlanta Street. This addresses the worst performing stay-place street segments, which was score 21. And it also provides new walkable destinations with the mixed-use development. There's good trans access on Pacific Highway 99W with Route 12 bus going down Pacific Highway. Provides new parks in the triangle with the green areas you see on the map. It also, from our community input, we found that they wanted sidewalks and crosswalks, so we provided that. And then it improves the low-value properties. These are renderings that we created. This is the before rendering, and you can see that it's a 2-lane rural road. The big parking lot on the left is by the movie theater. There's very few people who use it, so we wanted to put infill development there. There's also no sidewalks and no crosswalks, so it's a pretty much unsafe area to walk along. So in our after rendering, we put in mixed-use development in the infill in the parking lot. We added sidewalks. We converted from 2-lane to 3-lane road. The city goal wants to have, the TSP for the city wants to have a 5-lane road. We want to prioritize walkability, so we decided to use 3 lanes, including a on-street parking and a buffered bike lane and a planting strip as well to make it more walkable. We want to acknowledge the people that helped us out with the project: City of Tigard, Stay Place, and Portland State University. So, thank you.
Happy to take your questions. Yes.
Nice job. And I heard a little bit of it a couple days ago, so I have a little more context. But I am curious about the, so you just mentioned again that the TSP plan is to turn that into, what, 5-lane or something? Mm-hmm. Is that base? I mean, what is the traffic flow right now? And why do they project such a big need, or do they?
That's a good question. It's about 14,000 ADT. Not very much. The street section that we proposed is in another document called is a form-based code that they're working on called the Lean Code. So they are contemplating, kind of 2 different directions to go. We didn't really have any insight into any data that they were using to make that decision, other than it's kind of just 2 different visions of the area that different departments within the city have and are weighing. So it's just an internal conflict, I think.
I guess I can add one thing to it that I don't know if I can do this. That they did mention they wanted to make 72nd more like 99W, because everybody's, I think, somewhat jealous of all the economic development, which is more like fast food restaurants. And
yeah, why are you jealous of that?
That's just, Tigard likes the economic development going along 99W. It's the highway, and they want to basically copy that on 72nd. At least that's my impression from that. And we're trying to say, well, we want walkable destinations, not auto-friendly businesses. So it's a contradiction of what their community vision is for 72nd.
Can I ask a follow-up? So someone in Tigard said that they wanted to make Tigard the most walkable city in, the state, the world, something.
The Northwest.
Northwest. Okay. So who said that, and how much buy-in is there to that concept?
It's a strategic vision that the city council passed.
The council did.
Council did pass it. I don't know if I can. I'm hesitant to speak on behalf of the city of Tiger.
No, I just need a little context.
You want to say about
Yeah,
stakeholder
so-
interviews? I guess we interviewed, we did stakeholder interviews where we basically asked people what they thought of the vision. At least I asked people. And people, first thing they said is, they're nuts. That's just basically like, especially this car dealership owner, a Ford dealer right off the interstate, he was like, this is auto-friendly. You're not going to get people to walk here. This is all about cars here. Don't be like Portland. We're not Portland. And they're like, they're nuts. The city is nuts. That's what they kept saying. So that's what I heard from our stakeholder interviews.
I talked to a lot of property owners and property managers and real estate people in the Triangle too, and there was similar response. Definitely the proximity to I-5 was seen as the visibility there was seen as a big advantage, but also they definitely wanted more walkable environment and more pedestrian amenities and more destinations within the Triangle too. So I think there is recognition that they want that.
Still use the freeway to get there.
Yep.
But then, if there's
Right.
more that they can walk to, they might stay there.
Yeah. They need places to entertain clients
Yeah.
and to rejuvenate themselves and things like that. So definitely.
What of the triangle? What portion of the land use is residential? It's like under 10% or something like that.
I don't know about a percentage, but
Here's the beginning slide.
I'm trying to think what area.
so this area right here is a single-family neighborhood
Also apartment complex down
right here, and then there's one multifamily. There's only one multifamily development right down here, which incidentally is also right here is where you see that multifamily development right there.
And if I remember from when I saw this 2 days ago, there's less than 300 people living. Is that the right number?
So there's the graphic, the on the map graphic that we showed.
Where's the home?
This is only employees.
Yep.
So this is only employment data. So there's
243
employees, yeah.
live there.
Good.
Yeah.
Out.
So according to the strategic plan, there are right around 400 permanent residents.
There's only 16 people who live and work in the triangle.
The 243, I think.
What did you guys think of this?
You have an online question.
Okay.
As you alluded to in your on Wednesday presentation, but there's a question from Carson. How did the reliance upon proprietary data analysis process limit your limitation to make professional planning recommendations?
Well, I didn't. This, I think, right here, when you look at these elements, a lot of these elements are already included in existing street design standards. They're all included and covered in existing policies and documents that they already have. So we didn't really feel like it was particularly enlightening to get that information. So it was hard to know where to go with that. It was hard to. A lot of this is intellectual property of state of place. So we didn't really have the opportunity to dig into the specifics of how they produced that. So it was hard to make informed judgments about exactly what these things mean, from our point of view. And I think we would have rather had been able to do other things like look at crash rates and traffic safety and do bike and pedestrian counts and more traditional type of data analysis that we're more familiar with and we have training in, rather than use this, which was sort of a mystery to us.
Can I add one thing to this? When we asked our client about what we're contributing that they don't already have, because they have all these plans that have this already in it, they have streetscapes. So we asked our client, what can we provide you that you don't already have? And basically, prioritization was the only thing that we could provide to them, because the plans just, they tell them they want streetscape improvements, but they don't say where. So that's what we've contributed. But beyond that, that was pretty much it, is prioritization.
Okay, I think it's about time. So let's thank Curtis and Ray.